Welcome to the Heart and Soul Wellness Podcast, where we inspire women by teaching applicable skills and tools and assisting them with connecting with one another, healing, and aspiring to their highest selves so they can reach their full potential. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor to have Julie Lee with us today. And I met her at a Women in Business conference just like a few weeks ago. And I was so moved by everything that she shared. I'm just really excited to share. I'm just really excited for her to share her story. So let me go ahead and introduce her to you. Julie Lee is not a typical keynote speaker. Her personal experiences with human connection changed the trajectory of her life, igniting the passion behind her I See You mission, and made her into a powerful advocate of connected leadership. Through research and stories that are both vulnerable and inspiring, Julie delivers the wholehearted message that connection has the ability to up-level and even transform work culture, a relevant message that is right on time. Julie Lee is the author of I See You, How Compassion and Connection Save Lives, and the children's book, Broccoli Punzel, A Girl with Extraordinary Hair. With over 100 episodes on her podcast, I See You, she empowers thousands of listeners to succeed in relationships by embracing human connection. Julie Lee lives in Utah with her husband, Rob, and her two children, Samuel and Lydia. I love that so much. And I love this conversation about being seen and showing up and actually seeing each other. So Julie, if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners just a little bit about your story and what's brought you to the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an honor to be here. I'm happy to be here. We all have a story, right? We all have reasons and life experiences that push us in the directions we go. Keynote speaking was not something I ever thought I would do, not because I wouldn't have wanted to, but it just never really occurred to me. Writing these kinds of books, just not, especially the topics I talk about, definitely never would have occurred to me. But maybe just to summarize a little bit of the context of where I'm coming from, I grew up in a home where there was a severe mental illness with one of my parents. And it was at a time, I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate, at a time when the mental health conversation wasn't happening as openly as it is now. It wasn't talked about as openly. And I think a lot of people felt like there was a lot more shame around it. I know I certainly did. And so it was a little bit of a secret within our family. It felt like that way, at least to me. I don't have memories of anyone telling me I had to keep it a secret, but it wasn't something that we talked about outside of our home. And I dearly loved my family and I felt very loyal to them. I also saw a lot of pain and tragedy as this mental illness really took over our lives and really impacted all of us. And so when I left my home when I was 19 and I moved out to college, I kind of ran, and it wasn't running from people that I didn't love. It was people I loved and adored and wanted in my life. But I was excited to start a new chapter where that wouldn't be a part of it. This whole mental illness thing that I felt so alone in, that my family had struggled and grappled with. And so, even by like our third date with my husband, I was grilling him with questions about like, have you ever had a bad day? Like, do you have any history of like mental health challenges? And he hadn't. And, there were a few other reasons we got married, not just that one, but that was a big bonus for me. I was like, okay, I can have my own home. I've always been like super happy and driven and outgoing. And I just knew that like, I didn't ever want to talk about those words like depression, anxiety, suicide ever again. And so about a little under 2 years into our marriage, I found myself in a work situation, in a work placement where I was working in a really pretty toxic environment. And I am so used to just getting people to like me if I work hard enough. And that's what I did. And I just worked myself into my first panic attack. I remember being and maybe like you can come with me as listeners there for a minute of just being in a bathroom stall at work and trying not to vomit and just bawling and shaking uncontrollably and not knowing what was happening even physically to my body. But, at this point I was so stressed out trying to meet the demands of this job that I had stopped eating and I'd stopped sleeping. And not purposefully, but just, I couldn't keep things down. And I laid awake at night, just in so much anxiety. And so that kind of triggered the next on and off mental health crisis that I went through for the next 5.5 to 6 years, where I would be on and off medications, in and out of therapy. Some therapists would allude to it was kind of looked like PTSD. Others would say, an anxiety disorder, which I don't know, maybe you could argue PTSD is an anxiety disorder, but we really started digging in eventually into some of the childhood trauma I went through. And I certainly think there's a large component to that of the issues I've struggled with. But it really wasn't, it wasn't until I really was able to accept that this is a susceptibility I have. And that my stewardship is over my little people. I have 2 kids now, I'm so grateful for, and that it really just doesn't matter why or how or all the ins and outs that I wanted to understand of why I couldn't overcome it without medication, why all these things, all this shame I had ingrained from growing up. I really hit enough rock bottoms and got to enough scary, dark places that I realized, like, no, I can be happy, and I can use these resources that I believe are given from, everyone has their own feelings about like a higher power. But for me, I believe there's a God, and I believe he's blessed our world with many resources to help people in these situations. And I decided I could be wrong. Like, I don't want to be married to anything, but I don't ever plan to get off medication. Like, I have no plan ever, because that's what I would keep doing. I'd be like, I'm happy, I'm driven. Like, I'm nothing like what I watched growing up. And then I would get off and I would do okay for a little bit. And then I would tank hard, and I still go to maintenance therapy and I love it. And it's just been so, it led to me starting this podcast, I See You, because it really was the compassion and connection of people during that experience that saved my life multiple times. And that I came away feeling this need of like, I don't think people have any idea truly the power of human connection and the way it can transform the trajectory of someone's life. And I saw that happen close up because it happened to me personally. And so I started the podcast, I See You, like you talked about, and got contracted to write the book, I See You, and then was just barely able to publish this fun children's book to bring the message to kids, Broccoli Punzel. So now I'm primarily, I did the podcast, I See You, for several years and have over 100 episodes there still. And I just find the greatest joy in going and speaking to people and to teaching tools of how to really utilize connection and just work in incredible environments where we feel seen. And it's just an absolute honor. I love what I do.
I love that so much. You have such a beautiful story, and I appreciate your authenticity and vulnerability. So here at Heart and Soul Wellness, part of what my mission is to help women with connecting, healing, and aspiring to their highest self. And as you know, like you were talking about it, the shame often keeps us very trapped in like not being good enough, viewing ourselves as broken, viewing ourselves as like, deficient, keeps us in this downward spiral. Yet human connection and seeing ourselves as whole and as survivors actually empowers us to move forward. So I'm wondering if you could speak to what helped you grapple or rumble with like the shame that you felt about like, your past, your family trauma, all of this stuff to help you to see yourself differently.
I think it was a couple different things. One being, like I said, the people that were able to see me differently and trusting them a little bit. And there were times when I felt like I couldn't totally trust my own mind. And that was huge. Just the angels. I believe there were some probably that I couldn't see too. They're helping me. And for me, there definitely was a faith foundation that I can't deny. Even in like a secular setting, that for me, everybody has different beliefs and things, but I do feel like I have grappled a lot with with, you know, the purpose of life and what's it all for and what matters and all those things. I've definitely grappled a lot with those questions through the years, and then with other different challenges that have come my way, you know, a parent's divorce recently, and lots of faith crises within me of people, you know, trying to figure out what they believe. It's definitely during those really dark times, it became very important to me to decide what I thought and what I believed in. To really, I mean, I spent time like reading through old journals and reading through past experiences I've had just to ground myself of what do I believe in? What do I think? Why does any of this matter? Why do I matter? And so for me, coming to a place of understanding of, based on my own personal experiences and some of others, but especially my own, that I do believe that there's a higher power and that there is a purpose to my experiences. And if that's true, then that leads to other things that I believe are true. And it helped me really overcome that shame. I remember having, it's a really interesting moment in time that I had. I remember one night praying to my higher power and like just rolling around in bed and just asking, like, what have I not done? And we talk about connection and healing. That was at a time when I was feeling very not connected to any sort of higher power, and just being like, maybe this is all just this just, there's not anything more than this. And that's what we should be happy with. And for some people that I guess works, but it was something I really grappled with. And I remember like asking aloud in my mind, like, what have I not done? Like, I mean, I was scavenging lists online of how to not be depressed, learning a new musical instrument, like studying the best books, all these different things, exercising, cutting out sugar, cutting out caffeine, which was obviously a mistake, but like anything, right? Just to do this. And I just had this really quick thought, and it wasn't like a warm feeling or, you know, in the Christian world, a lot of times we talk about feeling warmth and things, and I definitely have experienced that, but I just had a really clear thought that did not feel like it came from my mind at all. And it was just, go to your doctor. And it's a simple phrase, but actually I think that anchored me for a lot of decisions that would come after that go to your doctor phrase, as far as healing and overcoming the shame that you asked about, is that I felt that was an answer from a higher power. And for people listening, maybe that's, you know, like maybe that's a God, that's a being, maybe that's a universe that you believe somehow works together for your good, something beyond me, that was the truth I needed to hear. And so that go to your doctor really influenced the way that I started to see the crises that I was experiencing, and that I couldn't just wish this away, that is not the mortal experience of life, that there were answers on the earth. There were answers with doctors that could help me. And also that I felt confirmed that my purpose in life included that I was meant to be happy and to use those resources, that I didn't need to just endure it, but that I could use resources to live a full, happy, abundant life. And for me, that has been having a medication that keeps me level. It doesn't mean I don't have bad days. It doesn't mean any of that, but it keeps me from sinking in so easily to that. I often think of, hopefully I'm not taking too long on this lesson, but I just want to share this analogy that's been really helpful for me in explaining because sometimes maybe you've had a bad experience with someone close to you that took an antidepressant. Maybe, you know, we've all had different experiences with it that influence our convictions. And I certainly have as well, growing up with what I did. But what I learned for when I'm on a good antidepressant, it's kind of like I'm in a house and I fall on the floor. Now, if I'm on a good antidepressant, I fall on the floor, but I can still look up and see that like there's light coming through the windows and that the sun still exists. And that today, like I can be like, oh, tomorrow will probably be a better day, like most likely.
Right.
I can recognize that it's a temporary feeling. When I'm not on an antidepressant and I go through something pretty rough, it's like there's a trap door under me. And when I fall, I just like the door opens and I just fall down into the basement and it closes. And so when I look around, I don't see that there's any sun that exists. I don't see that it's ever existed or that it will exist again. I don't see the outside. I just don't see how there could be anything but darkness moving forward. And it even clouds my judgment of what happened before, which is crazy. Like, I'm like, I don't think I actually was happy last week. I think I was having to try really hard to be content. Right. Like, it messes with you. And so for me, that is why I take medication. And I'm so grateful for it. I feel so much gratitude and I feel so much healing. Like I feel like the shame, I felt so much healing from that shame in my gratitude. And I always say, I'm going to give you a second to talk. Obviously I have some things I care about here as I word vomit all of this, but I always say like gratitude begets momentum. And I have found that to be so true for me. I teach leaders about that. Like what is healing and pain and loss, which we're all experiencing with the wars going on over in Russia and Ukraine, with the pandemic and all the loss we felt in so many different avenues of our life. What heals gratitude is what heals, and it begets momentum to move forward. And I found that in my own life and in healing from that shame.
It's so beautiful. It's so powerful to think about. Our last podcast was the art of acceptance and surrender, but really thinking about those supports that we need first in place, like you talked about, medication, support system, people who can see us for who we truly are. And then I love that you discussed a higher power, because a lot of our listeners are either going through a faith crisis, are grounded in, something secular, or, anywhere in between. But what we have found in recovery is that having some kind of spiritual practice, higher power, some kind of connection can be just so healing in recovery. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm curious. I have one question I wanted to ask, and I loved the analogy of the house, because it's true that I think sometimes we say, well, I have to face this and I just have to do it on my own. But we can find ourselves very stuck in this place where there's a lot of resources, supports, and things that are accessible to us to help us with really rising and really taking back our own power. But it's hard to see when we can't see the sun and it doesn't feel like the sun exists. So 2 questions for you. One is, I'll just ask my first and then we'll come back to my second. Is during those dark moments where you were questioning, what kind of, obviously you had some very powerful spiritual experiences, but what were some of the things that helped you pull through to continue that journey of asking questions and exploring your value and your worth through a higher power and through others?
The idea, like we talked about, of the higher power, like I don't know that it would have been, if I would have been familiar enough with what a higher power could feel like if I didn't see that embodied in people around me. The idea of like love without conditions. I feel like there were people around me that really embodied that, and it wasn't something I was used to, something I hadn't really experienced, at least that I could remember. It felt it was incredible to have friends that could sit with me in the unknown and love me, even though I was like at my worst, and really didn't have a lot to give to anyone. But to have people to choose and sit with me and remind me of my worth, even at that place, and want to be with me in that place, I think that opened up my heart to the possibility of even a higher power, because I was watching what that could look like in action. And especially, I think, having grown up it's my dad that has had the mental illness. And I think that, for me, seeing a God as a father figure and having mental illness kind of disrupt maybe what that image is very hard for me to believe in a higher power that could be that for me, I guess. And so I really look at the people that saw me. I say those words like, I see you, that really saw me through that made the greatest impact of me being able to explore and trust that maybe there was more for me in those really dark moments when my brain was telling me there wasn't. People that just would hug me so tight, and just that they believed in me, people saying things like, I know that doesn't feel real to you, like what I'm saying to you, that you're going to be okay, that you can get through this. but can you just trust me for this minute? Just trust me. Just believe for a second that maybe what your brain is telling you isn't true, and that you're going to be on the other side of this. Mantras were really helpful for me. When I first got into a childhood trauma therapist, that's when I really, because there were a couple of years in there where I like grappled with my work situation, and it was like, that wasn't really where the pain was coming from. It just kept popping up. And that's when we really got into like childhood rooted stuff. And I remember that first therapist that was a childhood trauma therapist. Actually, she was a burn victim. Her name is Sage Volkman. You can look her up online now. I haven't seen her in years, but she had like a couple nubs on her hands for fingers. Her body was completely burned and disfigured. Like her eyes couldn't shut all the way. And having this woman look at me and she's like, I'm happy. And, you know, when you're in that place, you're just like, how could you be like, I'm not happy. How could you be happy? But she really encouraged me by saying something to me. She said, you know, there's a version of you that has gone through this, that's rooting for you. There's a you in the future that's rooting for you. And I like feel teary even just saying that. And at the end of the appointment, she said, I want you to come up with a mantra that you're going to repeat to yourself this week. And that's what it was for me. She's rooting for you. And I still have moments where I tell myself that she's rooting for you. Like, there is a you that has this, I don't even want to say behind her, but just part of her now, you know, maybe not behind me, but part of me, part of my heart, part of my life experience that is so important. And I don't know, I have so much love and gratitude for the girl on the bathroom floor with her face in the nasty, dirty tile, just like begging for healing. Like, I don't feel shame about her. I don't feel anything. I just look and I'm like, man, the grit that it took for that girl to peel herself off the floor and to go and play Candyland with her kids when she felt like her life was over and spiraling out of control. The grit that it took to look outside of herself and see her kids and see they needed a mom. Like, and that's not to shame the moments when I couldn't do that for them, right? Because none of us are superhuman, but I really honor her, you know? Yeah. So I've had a lot of special people, mostly lots of really good people that help me to be open to that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that piece about your higher self. I'm touched by that, and thinking about when we're in it, when we're really going through something heavy, but yet we know that there's this part of us that knows that we can survive and knows that there's something more, right? It's beautiful because it can be healing in knowing that what we're experiencing right now is not permanent. Like the bathroom floor moment for you. You were able to go play Candyland with your kids, right? But even if you weren't, that moment isn't a permanent moment. It's a moment that we do end up moving through it. And so in the midst of all of this, it sounds like there were so many things that you found hope with. I'm hearing your higher power was very helpful for you. And then also these people who saw something more in you than you saw in yourself is so transformative as well. That's incredible. I'm wondering, as you moved through this experience, right, and as you moved through childhood trauma, we also know that it's very common in childhood trauma that when we have parents who are abusive or neglectful or challenging situations or dysfunction, that we often connect that to our higher power. And so it sounds like these positive experiences were helpful for you in being able to see yourself differently, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So I'm wondering, when we're dealing and we're really grappling with some of these difficult things, it's helpful to see others on the other side. And in the moment, it's painful, right? It's soul stretching, right? What are some of the other things that brought you hope? Or I'm hearing your higher self, but was there other things that brought you hope and like just thinking, okay, I can get through this moment, or maybe this moment, and then maybe this next hour, maybe this next day?
Right. Yeah, something that comes to mind also is when I started this journey, you know, I really had like one single sample for my sample pool of what anxiety and depression and these things looked like. And that was within my own family growing up. And I never saw him like get better in a way that looked like a life I would want, you know. Never found medication that worked for him, just a lot of things there. And so something that was really brought me a lot of hope was enlarging my sample pool, meeting people and reading stories of people that had struggled with anxiety and depression in their life, and that they weren't suicidal, and they weren't, you know what I mean? Like they weren't, they were, and now they weren't, or they were leading successful, happy lives. Like that was huge for me. And meeting people personally, I was able to connect with someone. It's actually the whole story behind the words "I see you" and how it all started. I met this girl, and we like fed through our therapist. There was like a non-HIPAA way we were able to meet up, and we fed bread to the ducks at the park with our kids, and we just sat on the picnic table and we just talked. And her life experiences were different from mine, but there were so many similarities. She was also this happy, driven, go, go, go girl that just like was on top of the world and had the greatest life planned out for herself, and she'd snapped. And I was able to tell her things that maybe I would have been embarrassed to tell other people, horrible thoughts I'd had, intrusive thoughts, fears, all of it. And she just was like, yeah, she just totally got it. And about 9 months later, it was my birthday, and she gave me a bracelet, which we sell bracelets now, like a metal cuff that said "I see you" on it. And and she told me, she's like, you know, like when whether it's like you're in a church congregation and someone says something triggering, or you're at the store and someone makes a comment, or you read something that whatever, or you're just having a bad day, like we could text those words to each other, like, hey, I see you. Like, oh, today's a rough day, and here's why. Like, I see you. Like, I know you. I get you. I know the worst of you. And I see you. Like, I know how hard you try. I'm in your corner. And that really, when I was choosing the name of the podcast, that's just what came to me, is like, this is it. Like, this is it. And then we hemmed and hawed with the publisher of titles, and it just came back to like, nope, that's what it's always been. It's always been "I see you," you know? So I think getting that bigger sample pool was huge and bringing me a lot of hope, which goes back to human connection, right?
Absolutely.
Connection. That's what healed, connection, you know?
Absolutely. Being seen and being heard is what we know really can help us with moving forward in terms of connection and feeling part of something. You know, the studies done on depression really show that when we have people who are healing, people who are healthy, people who can just hold space for us and hold this like loving kindness and presence for us with non-judgment, this is what really helps us, along with other things, moving through depression, anxiety, PTSD, all of these other things that we're faced with. Because if we can be seen at our core, at our most authentic self, and have someone who says, "I see you, I love you, you were incredible," even in our moments of weakness, right? Because that's part of our human experience. I think we get stuck sometimes where it's like, okay, well, I can be seen like as super mom, or like, you know, super boss or whatever, but really to be seen as a whole person and have people really acknowledge us for who we are, that takes a certain type of person, obviously, right? But this practice of seeing each other, I think is so transformative for us.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I say yeah, and that sounds like such an understatement. I'm like, yep, I believe it. It's just the entire life.
I love that. I love that. So one question I have for you is that when we are struggling, let's say with a relationship and triggering each other, or maybe not seeing the best in somebody, what do you recommend for people who want to move through that and see the best in someone, but yet they're focused on maybe their own weaknesses and the weaknesses of others?
That's a really good question and really interesting to think about right now. My first advice with that is to work on yourself first. I think that it is when we see the worst in others, at least in my own experience, and I'm sure there's all sorts of studies about this, when we see the worst in others, it's usually starting with seeing the worst in ourselves. And when we exercise self-compassion in ourselves, we are automatically more compassionate towards others. And so if you want to change the way you see someone else, I do. I struggle with this. I know that I have to start with me. I have to shore myself up, make sure I'm not in bouts of depletion where I have nothing to give. Like, I got to do some serious self-care for myself if I'm going to be able to reach out and see other people like that. When I talk to businesses and schools about this, we talk about this idea of high definition thinking, which I think we talked a little bit about when I talked at the conference you were at. This idea that it's really easy to see in absolutes, just like black and white television, right? And it works for us as kids. We grew up thinking of people in absolutes, good or bad guys, wrong or right. But as we have different life experiences, I mean, for the listeners, like, have you had that experience where you made a snap judgment about someone, and then you gotten a little closer to their story and you realized maybe you weren't totally on about that judgment and you just feel kind of dumb, you feel kind of stupid. I think when we have those experiences, we're forced, hopefully, to start thinking in color of people, seeing them in color more, just like the TV changed to color. And it's like, if you think about people in absolutes and black and white, it's almost like you don't know how much better it could be, like higher quality of life too, because it doesn't feel good, I don't think, to just see everything in black and white and just to make snap judgments about people without getting to know them. Like, I don't think that's a beneficial, wholehearted life, to steal a term from Brene Brown. But when we see people in color, I think that's having compassion on them and connecting with them, seeing that life is complicated. And most people are a combination of a series of good and bad choices, and choices that are complicated and aren't either good or bad. And then I talk about high definition thinking, which is where you can look at people looking for their strengths. And that's the most elevated way to think. And I talk about like high definition TV, like talk about realistically seeing someone, to see them in high definition. So you're not only connecting with them and having compassion on them, but you're choosing, like, your automatic default when you see someone is to figure out, like, what's the best part about them. That's what I aspire to, and I am not there. And I have moments where I feel it and I know that it's what I want, but it takes effort. That's been a really impactful way for me to try to look at other people.
Yeah. It sounds like it's a practice for you, that it's like, like, it's just like anything, the more we practice it, the more we develop that skill. So compassion, I think, is the same way. The more we practice it, the more we're going to develop more compassion. So my question then is, when you have days where you're hard on yourself, do you have a practice where you practice this, seeing the best in yourself and just really honoring where you're at now?
I mean, lots of mantras. So like just being quiet and breathing and just trying to connect to myself. Where I just because a lot of times when I'm hard on myself, for me, the physical sensation is I get really tight, like anxiety, and I'm just like, my heart starts beating faster. And so really doing physical, just like breathing for a while. I'm a really good breather. It's the truth. I remember when I first got into therapy, they asked if I wanted to participate in this breathing study. And they did, and I was like just a mess, and just felt like I was bad at everything. And they were like, "You are the best breather we have ever recorded." And I was like, "Oh, it's a win! It's a win!"
That's awesome.
I love it. No, but really, just like some time to be quiet and be still can really help ground me. Just like laying flat on the ground for a little bit and closing my eyes and forcing myself, because this is like speeding up, God, I got to get more done. Like, I'm having a day like this today where I had some things canceled and rearranged. So I was like, I didn't get my workout in here. And I'm just like, I want to be so efficient with my time, but I'm learning to care about impact instead of like quality or quantity, quality over quantity, right? Of like, what kind of quality of the day am I having, and what I'm doing I think, is it quality choices, or am I just trying to get done as much as possible? So that's for me when I get really hard on myself, and just being quiet and still for a little bit and sitting in that uncomfortable feeling of like, yep, I feel really frustrated with myself right now. That's true.
Yeah.
Like kind of accepting and acknowledging it and just letting it be and not trying to like run from that emotion that's really helpful for me.
Yeah. I love it. So sitting in with what's present, having compassion with it, and then accepting it as part of our human experience. We all go through these moments. Awesome.
And I will say, for me, sometimes it was hard to want to have self-compassion. Like, it's so easy to think like, of course I want to do that for other people, but not for me. But I think when I realized that there was some hypocrisy involved in that, when I realized that I actually am less compassionate with others when I'm less compassionate with myself, that was really motivation for me of like, no, I need to practice what I preached. If I actually believe this, I need to be doing it up here for me. That was really motivating for me. And I would hope we all want to be compassionate to ourselves because we're worth it. But I think it's okay if it doesn't start out being the reason. Hopefully it can ignite that and that can become the reason of that you think you're worth it. But for me, it started with, I wanted to treat other people with integrity, and actually do inside what I said they should do. So that kind of helped nudge me in the right direction, I think.
I love that. It's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this podcast. Your story is beautiful. You're such an inspiration. And I know that our listeners are really going to benefit from what you had to say.
Well, it's been my honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, listeners, for listening in. This has been special.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Heart and Soul Wellness Podcast with your host, Sarah Carter. Make sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any thoughts about what we talked about today, leave a comment. Also, you can find us at heartandsoulwellness.org and on Facebook and Instagram. Join us again as we continue to help women heal, connect, and aspire to their true and authentic selves.